A pleasant day, dear doctors, and welcome to our module in physiology. And I will be summarizing one of the most important chapters, which is lifted from our mother physiology book, which is Guyton. There will be some snippets from Ganong physiology, and we will be talking about the somatic sensations, particularly the general organization of the central nervous system, the tactile, as well as the position senses. Now, I strongly encourage you to utilize and download the study guide or handouts, which is found in your Google Drive, so you can follow through with the session. This session is being recorded and it will be uploaded in the ECDB portal under the designated course folder. So let's begin. Now, these are the following references which I will be using throughout the course of this module. So first, I will be using Guyton and Hall Textbook of Medical Physiology. It's actually both the 13th and the 14th edition. There's just some tables which I'm going to show you, which is not found in the 13th edition. And I will be summarizing and adding some excerpts from Ganong's review of medical physiology. So two of the most important and most high yield, yet most challenging textbooks for physiology will be utilized for this module, Guyton and Ganong. Now, let's go back to basics and review the organization of the central nervous system. Okay, so again, let us go back and review, okay, the organization of the central nervous system or the nervous system in general. Now, let's start off by mentioning that the central nervous system contains approximately 100 billion neurons. Now, here is the neuron. This is a structure of the neuron here on the right. And always remember the basic and structural as well as functional unit. The basic structural and the basic functional unit of the nervous system is a neuron. The neuron consists of a cell body, which we also call the soma. It contains two branches. One is the dendrites, the other is the axon. So these are the three structures that I want you to remember. The soma, or the cell body, the dendrites, and the axon. Okay, now I want everyone to remember that there will be signals that enter this neuron and it passes through what we call the synapses. Now, I want you to remember these synapses are usually located, okay, either in the cell body or the dendrites. So there are incoming signals which enters the neuron, and this is through synapses, which are located usually in the dendrites and the cell body. Now, let's highlight the axon. Now, there are signals and they will travel by way of a single axon leaving the neuron. So always remember the axon carries impulses or signals away from the cell body. So letter A axon is letter A away. So please take note of this, okay? So we mentioned earlier that output signals will travel by way of an axon. So the axon, okay, the impulses are carried away from the cell body, while the dendrite is towards. Now, here's an illustration from your textbook, okay, showing you the famous somatosensory axis of the nervous system. Now, there are several sensory areas which are found in the central nervous system. We have the spinal cord. We have the reticular substance, which is found in the medulla, the pons, as well as the mesencephalon. Another area, which is a sensory area, is the thalamus, as well as other areas of the cerebral cortex. Now, in case you have only a few neurons left, what you should memorize for the exam are the following: the spinal cord and the thalamus. Now, I want you to remember that this is the brain. This is actually interesting because this is a wrong-sided oriented brain. If you notice the sagittal cut here, this is posterior. Nandito yung cerebellum. This is where the frontal lobe is. Therefore, this is anterior. So please orient yourself. Ito yung nasa harap. This is in front. This is the one at the back. Now, what do we call this central line here, which divides the motor and the sensory cortex in the brain? Okay, back to basics. Can you tell me the name of this sulcus? Anyone? What is the name of this sulcus? Okay, very good. This is the famous central sulcus, named after Rolando. This is the central sulcus of Rolando. Now, what I want everyone to remember is anterior or in front of the sulcus is the motor cortex. This is what we will discuss in our next session. Behind or posterior to the central sulcus is what we call the somesthetic or the sensory, as well as the sensory association area. So your take home here, ano yung nasa harap? What is in front? Motor. What is behind the central sulcus? It is the sensory. So motor is in front. Sensory is found behind. Okay, now here is the bulboreticular formation, which of course you can find in the medulla, the pons, as well as the mesencephalon. Now here we have the thalamus. I'm going to put an X here, which is the major sensory relay area of the brain. Now I want to insert this because this came out about 3 exams ago. What do we call post-thalamic pain syndrome? What is the name of this syndrome? Post-thalamic pain syndrome. Okay, anyone? What do we call this disease? Example, you had a stroke in the thalamus. After that stroke, since the thalamus is involved, you're going to complain of severe pain on one half of your body. This is what we call Dejerine-Roussy syndrome. Okay, make sure everyone jots this down. This is not found in your handouts. Dejerine-Roussy syndrome. Okay, did everyone catch that? Post-thalamic pain syndrome. That is Dejerine-Roussy syndrome. Okay, now let's try to summarize what is mentioned in the textbook. There are 5 basic types of sensory receptors. Okay, 5 basic types of sensory receptors. Now, what are these 5 basic types of sensory receptors? We have number 1, we have the mechanoreceptors. Okay. Number 2, we have the thermoreceptors. We have the nociceptors, electromagnetic receptors, and lastly, the chemoreceptors. Now, if you study standard handouts, it does not include electromagnetic receptors as well as the chemoreceptors. Our goal to score higher and to crack as well as top the PLE is to read the textbook. So here, mechanoreceptors, thermoreceptors, noci or the pain receptors, the electromagnetic, and lastly, the chemoreceptors. Now, let's take them one by one. The mechanoreceptors have a very important function. The mechanoreceptors, as the name implies, mechano, it will detect mechanical compression or stretching. Okay, mechanical compression or stretching. So this is mechanical compression or mechanical stretching of the receptors or the tissues which are adjacent to that receptor. Okay, so this is mechanoreceptors. Okay, so please take note of this. Now, what about the thermoreceptors? As the suffix implies, thermal. So this has something to do with temperature. So the thermoreceptors will detect changes in temperature. Some thermoreceptors will detect cold, while other thermoreceptors will detect warmth. Now, question, what common metabolic disease can affect the nerve endings and thereby give someone paresthesias, as well, okay, as neuropathy? Okay, so paresthesias and neuropathy. So my question is very simple. What is this common metabolic disease? In fact, it usually presents with distal, symmetric, polyneuropathy. Okay, classic example, very good. It is diabetes mellitus. Okay, now what happens in diabetes mellitus? So hyperglycemia, take note, hyperglycemia causes activation of several pathways. One is the polyol pathway. Now, the polyol pathway produces sorbitol. And this will explain why patients with uncontrolled chronic diabetes mellitus will develop the cataract. Sorbitol will accumulate in the lens. There's also an activation of what we call the advanced glycation end products, or what we commonly call in internal medicine, okay, as AGEs. So again, what is activated? The polyol pathway, the AGEs pathway. There's also activation of the hexosamine pathway. And all of these pathways, okay, all of these will lead to oxidative stress. Now, can anyone tell me what ROS means? Can anyone here tell me? Can you type in the chat box what ROS means? Ano bang ibig sabihin ng ROS? Okay, ROS means radical or reactive. Okay, it means reactive oxygen species. Okay, again, this is the reactive oxygen species. So these reactive oxygen species leads to oxidative stress. As well as oxidative stress, this also causes what? This causes endothelial dysfunction. And on top of endothelial dysfunction, the most important thing related in diabetes is going to be endoneural hypoxia. Now, can anyone tell me what is the blood supply of a nerve? What is the blood supply of a nerve? What do we call that? What structure supplies blood to the nerve? I hope you guys are following. Okay, this is the vasa nervorum. Doc, why are you talking about the vasa nervorum? Open your textbook. They're going to tell you in uncontrolled prolonged diabetes, there is occlusion of the vasa nervorum, thereby leading to ischemia and endoneural hypoxia. This is what causes the nerve damage. Oh, ang haba pala ng pathogenesis, no? Why there is nerve damage in diabetes mellitus. Okay, so let's mention this one more time. Let's make sure everyone gets this. Diabetes mellitus is associated with hyperglycemia or increased glucose. When there's hyperglycemia, several pathways will be activated. One is the polyol pathway, the AGE pathway or the advanced glycation end products, and the hexosamine pathway. Now, polyol pathway activation leads to sorbitol formation. AGE pathway as well as hexosamine pathway activation, they all lead to production of reactive oxygen species. When there are too many reactive oxygen species compared to our body or system's ability to remove them, then oxidative stress occurs. With this oxidative stress follows endothelial dysfunction as well as endoneural hypoxia. This leads to occlusion of the vasa nervorum and nerve damage. This is the reason why. Okay, so let us continue with our discussion. Now let's move to the next type of receptors. So we have the nociceptors. Okay, so always remember, basta noci, okay, do not answer balasi. Okay, noci means pain. Okay, now these are the pain receptors. So I want you guys to remember that the nociceptors or the pain receptors, they will detect both physical as well as chemical damage, which occurs in tissues. So it's both physical damage as well as chemical damage. So no C, I always tell everyone, no, 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 no pain, no gain. Okay, so I hope you got this. No pain, no gain. Okay, so please take note of this. Now, next is the chemoreceptors. Okay, next is the chemoreceptors, meaning chemical. So the chemoreceptors are responsible for detecting the special senses, such as taste in the mouth, smell in the nose. Okay, another term for the receptors in the nose, they call them osmoreceptors. Okay, chemoreceptors will also detect oxygen levels in the arterial blood. Okay, chemoreceptors will also help detect, okay, the osmolality of our blood fluids. Okay, and as well as the concentration of carbon dioxide. Okay, now question, what receptors will detect changes in blood pressure? Okay, what receptors will detect changes in blood pressure? Okay, what receptors will detect changes in blood pressure? Okay, so this is the baroreceptors. They respond in response to pressure changes. So please take note of that. We have the baroreceptors. Now, here is a table which is actually lifted from a different chapter in Guyton, but I want to share this. This is the classification of the sensory receptors. We have the mechanoreceptors. Okay. So the mechanoreceptors are found in the skin. It's found in the dermis. It's found in the epidermis. So we have the tactile sensitivities. We have the free nerve endings, the expanded nerve endings, or the expanded tip endings. This is where you encounter the famous Merkel's disc. Okay. We have the spray endings. Okay. Would anyone happen to remember where you encounter the spray endings? Okay. Where would you encounter the spray endings? Okay. So the spray endings are usually seen in the muscle spindles, which we have a separate lecture on in the near future. Now, other mechanoreceptors are the Ruffinis. Then we have the two receptors which are encapsulated. So we have the Meissner's, then we have the cross. Then we have mechanoreceptors which are responsible for deep tissue sensibilities. Okay, deep tissue sensibilities. This includes, again, the encapsulated nerve endings, the spray endings, and muscle as well as the Golgi tendon receptors. Now, question, between muscle spindle and the Golgi tendon, which will respond in response to tension? Is it the Golgi tendon or is it the muscle spindle? Which responds to tension. Okay, very good, very good. Tension, okay, is letter T. This is the tendon. That's the Golgi tendon. Therefore, of the muscle endings, which responds to stretch. So as you can see, letter S or stretch. This is letter S. This is the spindle. Okay. So please take note of this. Okay. Again, please take note of this. Then we have the other mechanoreceptors, such as the sound receptors in the cochlea. And we also have the receptors for equilibrium. These are the receptors, the vestibular receptors. And as mentioned earlier, I want you to be familiar with this. We have the arterial pressure receptors, which we call the baroreceptors. And the baroreceptors are very abundant in the aorta, as well as the carotid sinuses. So please refer to your study guide. Now, the second type of sensory receptors are the thermoreceptors, which responds to either warmth or cold. The nociceptors, which are for pain. And lastly, we have the electromagnetic receptors. Okay, no, may chemoreceptors pala tayo. So second to the last, is the electromagnetic receptors, which are for vision. We have the rods, and we have the cones. Now, question: what vitamin is required for the visual pathway? What vitamin is required for the visual pathway? Okay, good. It is vitamin A, also known as retinoic acid. Now, what is the earliest manifestation? What is the earliest manifestation of vitamin A deficiency? What is the earliest manifestation of vitamin A deficiency? So this is what we call nyctalopia. Nyctalopia is night blindness. Okay, nyctalopia is night blindness. So please remember this, night blindness. Now, between the rods and the cones, which is responsible for color vision? Which is responsible for color vision? Which is responsible for color vision? Is it the rods or is it the cones? So letter C for color is letter C. This is the cones. Okay, please remember this. Okay, I hope everyone got this. Then lastly, of the classification of sensory receptors is the chemoreceptors. So I want to mention again, this very high yield, patok na table is actually not found in this chapter. It's found in another chapter. I just want to include it here. So these are the chemoreceptors for the following special senses. We have taste, smell, arterial oxygenation, osmolality, the blood carbon dioxide, as well as chemoreceptors for blood sugar or blood glucose, amino acids, and fatty acids. Now, this one came out in the physiology exam. What is the special chemoreceptor? For savory taste. Savory taste. What is the chemoreceptor? Or the taste bud, rather. What is the taste bud for savory taste? What do we call this? This is where monosodium glutamate. This is what monosodium glutamate, yung betsin, magic sarap, Ajinomoto. Okay, this is the famous umami taste buds. And umami taste buds are very sensitive to glutamate. This is what came out in the boards. Okay, umami taste buds are very sensitive to glutamate. So please take note of this. Now next, I made a table here. Medyo magulo ito sa textbook. So I made a table summarizing the different cutaneous mechanoreceptors. Meissner's, Pacinian, Merkel, and the Ruffini corpuscles. Meissner, Pacinian, Merkel cells, and the Ruffini corpuscles. So the Meissner's corpuscles respond to touch and light tapping. Pacinian, P is pressure, very deep pressure. And very unique is because this nerve ending has what we call the onion. This mechanoreceptor, rather, has the famous onion skin appearance. So what I want you to remember, okay, is Pacinian, Inian looks like an onion. Okay, the Pacinian corpuscle looks like an onion. Now the Merkel responds to the modality of touch as well as pressure, but Pacinian is deep pressure. The Ruffini corpuscles responds to the modality of sustained pressure. Now, question, of these cutaneous receptors, which is encapsulated? Which is encapsulated? Of these four cutaneous mechanoreceptors that you see, which are encapsulated? Okay, Meissner's, take note of this typo here. Okay, what else is encapsulated? There's one more. Dalawa yan. There are two that are encapsulated. Okay, it is the Pacinian corpuscles. Okay, the Pacinian corpuscles is also encapsulated. Now, I made another table so that hopefully your retention will be better. So we have here two very important additional mechanoreceptors, the muscle spindle, then we have the Golgi tendon organ, which will be discussed in another module. So always remember the stimulus for the spindle is letter S, it's stretch. The stimulus for the T, the tendon, is also T, which is tension. Both the muscle spindle and the Golgi tendon organ, okay, respond to the modality, or are responsible rather for the modality of proprioception. Okay, So proprioception means position sense. A proprioception means position sense. So please take note of this. Now next, a very nice figure here from your textbook showing you the different types of somatic sensory nerve endings. Okay, so what are the different somatic sensory nerve endings which are in the book? So first we have the free nerve endings, the expanded tip receptors, the tactile hair receptors, which are very, very close to the hair follicle. We have the Pacinian corpuscle, the Meissner's, the cross, and of course we have Ruffinis, the Golgi tendon apparatus. Then we have the muscle spindle. Now, question: what muscle is responsible for the goose flesh phenomenon? The goosebumps, the goose pimples, the goosebumps, goose flesh phenomenon. Once this muscle contracts, okay, what will happen is you're going to get piloerection. Okay, pilo or piloerection. Okay, so this is caused by the erector pili muscle. Okay, the erector pili muscle. So please take note of this. Now next, let's try to dissect this in the book. So we have the free nerve endings. And I want you to remember that they are found basically everywhere in the skin, as well as other tissues. Now, the major function of the free nerve endings is it will detect both touch as well as pressure. So if there's light contact of the cornea, okay, so basically this is the example that free nerve endings, for instance, even light contact with the cornea of the eye, okay, can elicit touch and pressure sensations, even if the cornea does not have any other type of nerve endings except for the free nerve endings. So that's one example mentioned in the book. So here's the photo from your textbook of how a free nerve ending looks like. Now, question: where do you find more free nerve endings? Is it in the fingertips or is it in the deltoid area? Where would you find most nerve endings? Is it in the fingertips or in the deltoids or in the cubital fossa? So my follow-up there is which is more painful? When you do a prick for capillary blood sugar or when you extract blood? Okay, where would you see the nerve endings? It's usually in the fingertips. Okay, there are more free nerve endings in the fingertips, and that will explain why getting blood from the capillary, okay, is more painful than extracting from the antecubital fossa. Now, next is the Meissner's corpuscle. Okay, so the Meissner's corpuscle is encapsulated. So as you can see here, it's encapsulated. It's a little elongated. And I want you to remember that the Meissner's corpuscles are nerve endings of the large type AB myelinated sensory nerve fibers. Now, question. So not a question, but rather I just want to add some input. So if this is the nerve, you have to remember it has myelin sheath. Okay, so the myelin sheath is just like a blanket, a cover. So this is your jelly roll theory. Okay, so the myelin sheath covers and insulates the nerve. This is the nerve. Let me just encircle this. This is the nerve. Ito yung myelin sheath. Now, my question is very simple. What cell produces the myelin sheath in the peripheral nervous system? Okay, PNS, peripheral nervous system. What cell produces the myelin sheath in the peripheral nervous system? Okay, very good. It is the Schwann cell. Okay, the Schwann cell. Now, what about the central nervous system? What is the cell that produces the myelin sheath in the central nervous system? Okay, it is now the oligodendrocytes. Okay, the oligodendrocytes. Okay. So if you look within this capsulations, there's a lot of branching terminal nerve filaments which are found within or inside the capsulation. Okay, now this is what everyone has to memorize. The major modality that the Meissner's corpuscle responds to, okay, is low frequency vibration. Okay, now question, what is responsible for deep pressure vibration? Okay, deep pressure and vibration. Which corpuscle? Hindi siya Meissner's. What corpuscle responds to deep pressure and vibration? Okay, very good. Deep is Pacinian. Okay, deep is the Pacinian. Okay. So please take note of this. Now, what about the expanded tip tactile receptors? Now, the most important here, yung pinakapatok na example of the expanded tip tactile receptor is the Merkel's disc. Okay, now I want you to remember this: hairy skin and your expanded tip tactile receptors. The hairy parts of the skin basically contain moderate amounts of expanded tip receptors, even if the hairy parts have almost no Meissner's corpuscles. Okay, so see, Merkel is hairy. Okay, hairy Merkel. Okay, so please take note of this. So take a deep breath, stretch. Okay, take a deep breath and stretch. Does anyone happen to know who the wife of Prince Harry is? I'm just curious. Do you know who the wife of Prince Harry is? Okay, let's pause for a non-academic moment. Anyone? Okay, very good. Okay, it's the Duchess. Meghan or Meghan Markle. Okay. Sino si Meghan Markle? Markle si Merkel. Sino yung asawa ni Merkel or si Markle? It is Harry. Okay? So please remember that. Now, very important structure highlighted in the textbook. And this is known as the ego dome receptor. Now, these Merkel's discs, they're going to be grouped together. Okay, the Merkel's disc will be grouped together. Okay, so as you can see here, you have a couple of Merkel's discs here, and they're grouped together. And they will be grouped together as a receptor organ, which we call now the ego dome receptor. They will project upwards like what you see here. Okay, it's on the underside of the epithelium. So the letter E here is the epithelium of the skin. So when the Merkels get together, or when they are grouped together, we call them the ego dome receptors. Okay, now we're almost done. Next is the hair and organ touch receptors. Now, I want you to remember that any slight or minimal movement of the hair on the body will stimulate a nerve fiber. And each hair that we have, every hair that we have has its basal nerve fiber. This hair and organ touch receptors will detect mainly movement of objects on the surface of the body, as well as initial contact with the body. Okay, so please take note of this, initial contact of the body. Okay, so please take note of this. Now, next is the Ruffinis endings. Ruffinis are encapsulated. So I think I had a question in a previous table, which of the following are encapsulated? And in that table, what was included there was the Pacinian and the Meissners. And yes, it's correct, Ruffini is also encapsulated. Now, the Ruffinis are usually found in the deeper layers of the skin and the deeper internal tissues. Okay, so please take note the Ruffini is deeper and deeper. Now, the Ruffini nerve endings adapt very slowly. You usually find the Ruffinis in the joint capsules, okay? And the function of the Ruffinis endings in the joint capsules will basically help signal the degree of joint rotation, okay? So please take note of this. This is the Ruffinis endings. So we're going to end this module with this table from Ganon. Okay, it's a very busy table, but I want you, okay, I want you to go over this table, which is found in your study guide. So I just want to highlight the following. So the principal sensory modalities is going to be touch, it's going to be proprioception, it's going to be temperature, it's going to be pain. Okay, There's also itch, which we will discuss in the next module. There's also hearing and balance, as well as smell, which is also discussed in a separate module for the special senses. Okay, so these are the different principal sensory modalities: temperature and touch, pain and proprioception, itch, and special senses such as hearing, balance, smell, and don't forget taste. Okay, now I want you to go straight to the modality of proprioception. I want you to remember this includes the spindles and the Golgi tendon, with the spindle responding to the stimulus of stretch and the Golgi tendon responding to the stimulus of tension. Don't forget the cutaneous mechanoreceptors. We have Meissner's, Merkel, hair follicle receptors, Pacinian, Ruffini. Okay, so please take note of that. Now for vision, which I failed to mention earlier, this is where you have your photoreceptors. Okay, ito yung unique, the photoreceptors. This is of the rods and the cones. Then for balance, I want you to remember, okay, angular acceleration. This is the semicircular canals. Okay, angular acceleration. That is the semicircular canals. Now, can anyone here tell me what is responsible for linear acceleration aside from the otolith organs, the hair cells? Linear. So we have here the utricle. What else? Fill in the blanks. The utricle and the saccule. Okay, the utricle and the saccule. Smell, of course, is the olfactory epithelium. And you're going to be talking about the relationship with cranial nerve number 1, or the olfactory nerve. Okay? So basically, this ends this module here.